On this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, I welcome Mike Derrick to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. An art teacher and coach, Mike was thriving until his physical in 2016 revealed abnormal liver numbers. Diagnosed with non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, he received a liver transplant in 2018. In 2020, he contracted COVID-19 with dangerously low oxygen levels. His doctor advised a ventilator. Hesitant, Mike trusted his medical team, and the decision saved his life. This will be a good one. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing? I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow the podcast on Facebook at Survive and Thrive 8791. The podcast, or you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm in it for the follows and the likes at tdecora8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at Tim Decora. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or like button wherever you listen to the show. Leave me a comment if you like what you heard. If there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to tell their story, email me at tdecora@gmail.com. Glad you could join us today. Our mission is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will air on Monday and Thursday morning, featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects such as grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, divorce, success despite challenges, etc. Our guests will share how they learn to survive and thrive. We're going to get to our guest here shortly, but we always have to spit some stuff out from the internet. According to the internet, and the internet is always right, correct, Michael?
Most definitely.
Most definitely. In the U.S., an estimated 1.5% to 6.5% of adults are diagnosed with NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Say that 6 times in a row fast, which translates roughly to 9 to 15 million people. You, unfortunately, were one of those 9 to 15 million people back in 2016. Today, I welcome Michael Derrick to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Raised in Randolph, Wisconsin, Michael is a proud Rocket. In high school, he was a 3-sport athlete, excelling in football, basketball, and baseball, and he tells me excelling is abstract. After high school, Michael would take his talents to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and we'll hear a kind of a funny little story on how that worked out, and joined the Warhawk football team his first 2 years there. After working different odd jobs throughout his early years, he got into coaching. Deciding that was something he wanted to do, he realized back in the old days, you had to be a teacher, and he realized an art degree would be a path that would lead to coaching. This has led to a long career in teaching, including the last 30 years at Oregon High School, which is just south of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. Today, I'm so glad you could join us. The man with 2 names, Michael Derrick. What is up?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is so cool. Randolph, Wisconsin, your hometown. And we talked about it on the phone leading up to the episode today. I absolutely love that place. I've known about that place since, I would say, the early 80s when I started playing basketball. Population is just under 1,800, and I do the old hee-haw salute. Population 1,800, Randolph, Wisconsin. What was it like growing up in Randolph?
Started out there. My mom was from there and had been there for many generations. And getting to grow up there was, like you said, a small town. No fast food places. No like big name gas stations. Nothing like that.
No stoplights. I also mentioned.
No stoplights. Eventually, I think it was after I got to college, they put up a blinking, flashing yellow one at the railroad tracks. It was, you knew everybody. Everybody knew you.
All the other parents yelled at you as well and kept you in check.
Pretty much. I remember once my dad worked for the phone company and I was downtown and he knew about it before I even got home. So
news travels fast in little towns.
It was. It was just an interesting, fun town. A lot of relatives. I mean, I knew everybody. And again, a lot of them I was related to. It was an interesting town, a very religious town.
Mm-hmm.
And so nothing was open on Sundays. You always had to find a way to entertain yourself.
And we all could back then.
Back then, there was tons of baseball games in the park. It was someone would be knocking on your door if you want to come out and play, ride your bike, go all around town. Yep.
Well, before we get to your story, I need to talk about our sponsor. And our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants, are a place that people can escape to. For me, it's a great escape from cooking dinner. Do you cook?
I do like to cook.
You do like to cook. I am the cook in our house. So with their great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere, people keep coming back. With locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb, most communities in the Dane County area can get to a Buck and Honey's within 10 to 15 minutes. And this is where I do the little drum roll. Have you been to Buck and Honey's before?
I have. I've been to the Monona one just outside of town there, or I guess it's not really outside town, but it's on the
kind of heading out that way.
Kind of heading out that way over by the bay.
Yeah.
But we went there as a family just not too long ago, last spring, and it was awesome. The food was awesome, and like you said, I think the atmosphere was kind of the neatest. The way they have it set up and designed is really cool.
Yeah, the next time you go, have the pizza. I would recommend the Bombers Special. It's really good stuff.
Alrighty.
On the podcast, our guests will follow the format for sharing their story like this. In segment 1, we talk about what was it like, your history, and you've kind of shared a little bit of that already. What happened? That was to get you on the podcast, and there was originally just one thing that got you on the podcast, but it's going to turn out to be 2. In segment 2, we are going to continue to talk about what happened and get into what it's like now and discuss your 5 suggestions for thriving. So segment 1, what was it like before and what happened? You grew up in Randolph, which we've already talked about, just a little under an hour northeast of Madison, not too far. And you already talked about your mom, and you have a sister as well. Let's talk about your dad a little bit.
My dad grew up in Millbank, South Dakota, actually. My grandparents had moved to Sun Prairie for a job opportunity when he was in the Navy. And so when he came here, he actually met my mom in Bristol, Wisconsin at a dance on a Friday night.
Been there before.
Yep.
Driven by.
So he worked for the phone company when I was growing up. He was a big guy, 6'4", like 270.
Sounds like a Randolph guy.
Yeah, just like huge arms, because back then, he had to climb the telephone poles and all that kind of stuff. So intimidating guy, to say the least. But he was my dad, and I loved him. My mom grew up in the area. She was from a very large family. She had 8 siblings. And so I had close to 30 first cousins, and almost all of them lived right around there. So I went to school with a lot of my cousins, first, second, third, all the way down.
A lot of people had your back.
I like to think so. I hope so. And then I have a younger sister by 2 years, and just an awesome person. I admire her a lot. She is also a teacher. She is married, and her husband is a teacher and a coach. And they live in Janesville. They teach at Janesville Craig.
And you've got a family of your own, and you kind of idolized. And hopefully your wife, when your wife listens to this, she might need some Kleenex. You idolize your wife for a number of reasons, but you're here probably today because of her. And then you have 2 amazing kiddos. So go ahead and hit those.
Yeah, my lovely wife Diane looks after me.
Yes.
I mean, like you said.
So does my wife.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here probably, literally alive if it wasn't for her. And so I'm so lucky to have her in my life. And then we have 2 children. Our first is, our oldest is Samantha, and she is a senior at La Crosse University. So she is going to
Hence, you can't really see it unless you're on Spotify, but he's got a University of La Crosse shirt on.
Yep,
okay.
I gotta show a little support. But she'll be graduating this year in finance. She wants to be one of those people that takes care of your money for you.
And take care of mom and dad's money?
I'm hoping so. And then my son, Noah, is actually a freshman. We ended up somehow we ended up with a gap in between them, 7 years. And so he's a freshman. I'm lucky enough. I have him in my class this year.
Oh, boy.
And, yeah. He loves sports. He played football. He didn't go out for basketball in high school, but he's now working on his tryouts for baseball. He's a catcher.
After high school, you enroll at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and I think this, when we were talking about this today on my driving around to get breakfast, I think this is kind of funny. Tell us why you chose the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, which is, when I say funny, I'm not talking about the school. The school is a very good school, athletically, academically, but tell us why.
Well, when I was younger, especially in the early part of high school career, I was not thinking whatsoever of going to college. I had no interest in it. Things kind of fell into place. I wanted to go out for football to kind of make a connection with my dad. I came from a I like to call it a rich history of football.
Football family.
I wanted to go out, but I was a tiny kid. I was 5'2", 120 pounds as a freshman. And then luckily I grew, and I ended up having an all right football career in high school where I got recruited by some smaller schools, not very big ones. I kind of started thinking it would be fun, and that fall, everybody was coming back with all their college swag,
Yep.
showing where they were going to go. And then I thought, well, maybe I'd give it a try. Wanted to see where I was going to go, but I had no clue. My parents didn't go to college, and I didn't have a lot of experience with colleges. And so I relied on my art teacher to help me some, and I just decided I was going to go. And I was taking a college prep course in an English class, and we had to choose our own book to read. And I was reading the Fast Times of John Belushi.
Oh, boy, yeah.
Yeah, he was... I just thought he was hilarious and kind of...
Saturday Night Live
Saturday
fame.
Night Live, yeah. I started reading the book and found out that he was a really good football player. He was actually an all-state football player in Wheaton, Illinois, and then all of a sudden he didn't... In the book, they talk about how he didn't know where he wanted to go to college, and he decided on the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and something just went off in my head like, well, that's where I need to go. So I went down to the guidance counselor, and back then he was in a little office, and I just said I'd like an application for the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and and he goes, do you want one for any place else? And I was like, nope, that's it. And I just took that, filled it out, got accepted, and that's where I ended up going.
That's where you ended up going. After college, you would start your teaching career in Hebron, Illinois. Wisconsin would, however, call you back. And what happened?
When I first started teaching in Hebron, Illinois, I chose Hebron, Illinois because it was a small town, a lot like
Randolph?
Reminded me of Randolph. And then when I went down there and saw that it was a lot like the cornfields right next to the football field, I was like, well, that must be a sign. So
Yes.
I started my teaching career there. Shortly after we'd started that fall, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he passed away in May that year. Kind of felt like I got ripped off a little bit. I didn't get to know my dad as well, especially away from being a kid. But eventually I spent a lot of time coming back to my hometown of Randolph and spending weekends there and, hanging out by my mom and my sister. And I was kind of like to get back near there. So
you get hired then to teach art in the Oregon School District, and there's a couple of, there's an old school reason how you found that out, and it was through your mom found that out. Tell the listeners about that old school way of posting jobs back then.
Back then, I was home on a weekend, and my mom was going through the paper, and lo and behold, there was a ad for an art teacher position in Oregon, Wisconsin. It was kind of a funny story. I got home in Illinois, and I had to fill out the stuff, so I had to call them and send them. They had to send me the applications.
Send you a packet.
Right. It wasn't online or anything. There was nothing with the computers yet. They sent it. I got it I think it showed up at my house on Thursday. Came on Thursday by the time it got to me, by the time I called them.
The snails finally got there, right?
Right. And so I'm the worst typist in the world. So I was trying to type up the forms and the application. And then I hopped in my car and came up to see my cousin, who was living in Madison, and tried to figure out how we could get it to him, get it to school on time. It was due that Friday. That, again, was another interesting story. But I got it in, and they called and interviewed me.
And the rest is history. We fast forward to 2016, and you're in your career. You're teaching. You've got close to, you got over 20 years at that time, right? 20 or 21 if I've done my math correctly. And this is the reason why I've got you on the show today, is what happened then in June? You're finishing up, do you remember what year it was?
I think you're right. That would have been close to 20. Might have been 21. because I started in 95 in Oregon, and so it would have been close. But I was putting together an art show. I had been in for my annual physical, and the doctor called me while I was putting up the show and said that, your numbers don't look right. We'd like to really check it, some of them with the liver. He was
with the liver, yeah.
With the liver, yeah. They called, and he's like, we'd like to rerun the test just to make sure. So, I was told, like, don't have these foods, try staying away from this, and then we'll retest. And when the second test came back, there was no difference. It didn't look good. He suspected possibility that it could have been cancer, but he was leaning more towards cirrhosis of the liver right away from what some of the x-rays had showed. I was, shortly after that, in August, then they start running all the big tests just to make sure. And then I was diagnosed with NASH. I did the MRIs, all the different tests.
All right, so we're going to go back a little bit. NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Say that. I think I said 6 earlier. Say that 5 times as fast as you can.
I don't think I could say it once. So.
Yeah, I was having trouble saying it one time. However, what we have, though, is we've got a situation where you get this, and then you mentioned cirrhosis, and the automatic question that probably anybody has when the word cirrhosis is mentioned is, were you a big drinker? Did you drink a lot? And your answer was?
No, when I was younger in college and kind of living that lifestyle, I'm sure I had enough drinks, but once I got married and my wife wasn't much of a partier and stuff, so we didn't go out very much. I had an occasional beer every now and then, but nothing too serious. Like I mentioned, I think a 12-pack of beer would have lasted a year in my house.
Because our listeners want to hear how this turns out, and there's another extenuating circumstance that happened because of the diagnosis of NASH, we want to hear about how this is all going to turn out and the coping strategies that you use to work through a life-changing event. I need to talk about the sponsor one more time, and then we're going to get into segment 2. Buck and Honey's has been with the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew since the beginning, with 4 locations in the Madison area. One is always near. People ask me why Buck and Honey's. Owner Tom Anderson places a high priority on the mental health of his employees. He has a mental health professional available for them should they need support. I don't know how many businesses go above and beyond their EAP, Employee Assistance Program, but Buck and Honey's does. In 2016, you would be diagnosed with NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. I said it fast because it's right there.
Yeah.
Almost 2 years later, you would undergo liver transplant surgery. Because of your transplant, you were considered immunocompromised and thus contracted COVID. That's the second extenuating circumstance that now we've uncovered. In segment 2, you will hear more of Michael Derrick's story and how he has survived and thrived. Please stay tuned. Don't change that channel. You're not going to want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We'll be right back.
If you, a loved one, or someone you know is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help and resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available 24/7, 365, and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Emergency Crisis Services, dial 911. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, dial 988. To connect via web, chat, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to say 3 words. I need help. Now, back to the show.
We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim Decora. The podcast is where I feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. Michael Derrick is here today to talk about what it was like to not only go through a liver transplant, details of that, as well as being immunocompromised and having a pandemic hit us. And he would spend some 40 days in the hospital having to deal with that. And in the end, he's here today to share his story in hopes that his journey will inspire someone like him to survive and thrive. And we understand that people are going to get transplants. Those happen. But hopefully we don't have to deal with another pandemic, I hope. And if we do, hopefully we handle it much differently than we did in the past. There's my political statements for the day. In 2018, you would receive a liver transplant due to NASH, Nonalcoholic Steatohepatitis of the liver, which put you on a liver transplant wait list. Anyone listening who might be getting a transplant or know someone can really benefit from this episode today, because you're going to kind of walk us through some of the details. What can they expect getting on the list, going through the transplant, and then the after effects? Can you go through and just as briefly, as long as you want, whatever, spin your yarns?
All right. For me, I think a lot of it was just kind of living day to day. Once I found out, I'll be honest, at first I maybe understand the gravity of the severity of it.
I think some people go through denial.
Yep. And then, as I mentioned when we were talking before, you always heard about how the liver is one of the coolest organs because it can heal itself. It can regenerate. I was kind of thinking, well, if I did things a little better and I tried to watch things a little better, maybe I'd be able to kind of reverse it a little bit, or at least make it better.
It'll bounce back.
It'll bounce back. It doesn't happen with NASH. So, I mean, I lost probably 30 pounds by just walking more, drinking a lot more water. During that whole process, that 2 years, there was always something that popped up. As I was mentioning, different procedures I would have to go through just to get checks. They would have to go down my throat and cauterize bleeders because the liver would send blood and different things to the wrong place because it wasn't functioning right. That one actually cost me to be in the hospital for a couple weeks after diagnosis. A lot of things got better as those things happened, because then they found different meds and were able to kind of help control it. Almost the last year before I had the transplant, things were going pretty smooth. It didn't seem a whole lot different. I mean, I was watching my diet. Unfortunately for the liver, anything that tastes good is bad for you.
Anything that tastes good is bad.
Yeah, there was, you had to watch your salt, your sugar. If you take those two things out of most menus, that's not leaving you a whole lot. The thing that they recommended was a lot of steamed vegetables, which I am not really a good vegetable guy. So,
coming from a farm town, that's a lot.
Yep. I was working on being better and feeling pretty good, doing all right.
And then your number, and one thing we talked about were your numbers, and we couldn't remember what that scale was, because on episode 36, I had Dee Dee Crowley on, and she talked about having her liver transplant, and there were some numbers that we tried to think about, you and I, but you ended up having a situation where those numbers were elevated, and that moved you up on the transplant list.
Right.
And that's something you don't want to be elevated on, but it is, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right. It's not a good sign for you, but it's definitely one that moves you up on the priority list. I want to say it was an INR number. That's what they checked. And so every Friday I would go in after work and they do a quick check to see where my levels and numbers were at. And eventually it just kind of got high enough. Like I said, I kind of laughed. You got to know the nurses pretty well and stuff. And so when my numbers would go up, they would actually kind of cheer for me because they knew that I'd be getting a little closer.
Give you a little fist pump.
Yeah. They're like, oh, your numbers are up a little bit,
So your numbers go up, and then you must have gotten a call.
Sitting watching TV, and it was probably about 11 o'clock. And I remember telling my wife I wasn't really tired.
PM.
Okay. Yeah. I wasn't really tired. So I thought I would sit up for a little bit, and all of a sudden my phone rang. And a lot of times, at that time of day, you don't
not expecting
a call, and you're kind of wondering. But I saw it was a Madison number, and then I kind of thought, wow, what the heck? I'm up. Who would be calling me at 11 o'clock if it wasn't something? And sure enough, it was the hospital, and the nurse kind of introduced herself and said, "Hey, we think we got a perfect donor match for you. Can you be in the hospital within 2 hours?" I remember I was in the living room and I took my phone into my wife and I'm like, "You got to hear this."
You're not going to believe it.
I know. It was like out of the blue. It wasn't, obviously it wouldn't be anything you'd be expecting, but yeah, we can be there. So we made arrangements for someone to come and check on the kids, and I went in, and then in 24 hours, I was headed into surgery.
So you go into surgery, they probably take you in the morning, and you wake up, and tell our listeners when you woke up from surgery, what was kind of going on there.
Right. Well, I went in and I sat in a room for 24 hours. They didn't want me to eat. They didn't want anything like that. And then, of course, there was also the process of getting the donor's liver to me. I was lucky. A wonderful lady in Minnesota was my donor. The unfortunate thing is that, for that type of donation, it's someone passed away, which is sad, and you feel a little guilty about that. By the time they got it, so it was about midnight when I went in for the actual surgery site. Like I said, I'd been there 24 hours, said goodbye to everybody, and you're
see you later.
See you later. I think my cousin just kind of hit me because I think I said I'll see you on the flip side, and yeah, I mean my family, they stayed in like a lobby area almost.
Sure.
That they had set up for people to stay. So they were there. It was 11 or 13 hours was the actual surgery. They had 3 different teams that had to work on me. So one team kind of gets you prepped. One actually, puts in the liver, and then there's another team that kind of takes care of everything afterwards and makes sure.
Handing off the baton to each other.
It's definitely a team effort, but woke up in the ICU. And luckily I was doing well enough, like all the tubes and everything were already out of me. So that was pretty awesome. I was doing well. And so I got to see my wife and kids right away. And then people kind of start trickling in afterwards. In the ICU, I wasn't in there very long, like a day or two. And then got moved to a room, yeah.
Oh, it's okay. So they moved you from ICU to just a regular room. And at some point they say, "Hey, we're going to send you home."
Yeah.
Give you some walking papers.
Yeah, we were kind of laughing about that because I was only in for 10 days. When they said they were getting ready to send me home, I was almost in shock. I didn't really kind of want to go home.
I'm getting 3 square meals here and free TV.
Yeah,
and I'm laying around and everybody's
waiting on me and making sure I'm okay. So there was a lot of security there. When they said it was time to go home, I wasn't so sure that was the best place for me. But as you mentioned, in the hospitals, a lot of sick people there, and with that type of surgery, you're safer off at home.
You take off for home, and you had this major surgery. It wasn't like you had a wart removed or a hangnail, clipped. Tell us now, so the surgery occurred during the summer, correct?
Yep, June 25th.
June 25th, and then you're at home kind of doing some rehab, and then August rolls around, and being an ex-teacher like you start getting a little ramped up and a little anxious for professional development coming up in August, and football starts, and kids are back in school, not necessarily for school, but for athletics. And the school year's coming around, and you're thinking, I think I'm ready to go. But that wasn't necessarily the case, because your doctors said maybe you should kind of ease into it a little bit.
Yeah, the rehab was going good, practicing walking up and down the driveway, and eventually you got to the part where I was doing a little more of your everyday events, and I was feeling pretty good for the start of school. And I did actually make it to the first day of school, but once I got there, the doctors are kind of like, it's not really a good idea. It takes a little longer than just a couple months to heal up. And then, of course, with the immunocompromised, they're like, being around all those kids enclosed that long is not probably the best idea. So they pretty much insisted that I take time off.
And we're going to set this up a little bit, and you were going old school a little bit. You talked about your dad, and I thought this was kind of a little bit touching, but at the same time, it's who your dad was. He was tough, and he had pancreatic cancer, and you said that on the day that he passed away, he went to work.
Yeah.
And here you are thinking you've got a little bit of that old school mentality. I'm going to go to work because, and all I do is I'm just kind of walking around the room with kids and been doing this all my life. This is going to be no problem. So you were leaning towards your dad's thinking versus the doctor's thinking. So you're back in school. They mentioned probably maybe not the greatest idea to go full throttle. So they set you up on a schedule, and you talked about your principal, kind of talking you through some things. Go ahead and hit that.
Yeah, we have an awesome principal, Jim Pliner, and we were kind of talking, and he was going over some of the stuff that, they get sent them different things and about, my condition and what they have to kind of be aware of. And we were kind of talking about school, and like you said, my dad went to work the day he died. He didn't believe in missing. I can't remember him until he had the diagnosis of cancer, missing a day of work in, 20 some years that I remember him. I was kind of the same, if I had a cold or whatever. Unfortunately, I'm still that way. I still go in whether I'm perfect or not, probably getting a little bit better now, especially after a pandemic. They don't want anybody in there, but I didn't want to miss school. As a teacher, it's a lot of work to make up because you're still responsible for the learning. You're still taking care of anything, whether it's a sub or whatever. I was ready. I felt I was ready to go back to school.
So I have this in my notes. Unlike a lot of professions, and people may not know this, or some of our listeners may not know this unless they're in teaching themselves or they have a spouse that teaches, or even maybe a son or daughter. Teaching doesn't allow you to totally check out because you need to stay on a curriculum schedule. You need to meet certain timelines with different goals and concepts. So you got to be on top of your lesson plans to make sure they're done in a certain time frame. At times you're also teaching the sub what they need to be teaching and specifically write down. So you got to get these plans, and it typically probably takes anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour to get those plans set up for a sub. And you're having to do this all while you're coming off of a major transplant surgery. So talk about the schedule a little bit that they put you on.
Right, so that, like you said, making the plans, it's almost like you got to work twice. Because not only you got to have your plans ready for the subs so they can come in and successfully take over the classroom and run it smoothly, but then there's going to be that part they're also not going to, a lot of times they're not even involved in the same field that you might be teaching in. They're kind of filling in, and so we're not talking about just one day. I mean, we were talking about like a pretty significant amount of time they wanted me to miss, and then you would have to make up coming back. I didn't really want to take a big hunk of time all at once. Talking to Mr. Pliner, he was kind of like, well, we got to figure out something because the doctors don't want you to be around them that much. And he was very creative, and we came up with a plan where I basically got to have long weekends for a whole semester. So
you had banker's hours.
I did. I had Thursdays and Fridays off, and it kind of provided me a nice opportunity also to reconnect with some of my family and things like that. So it was awesome. I had a really good sub that filled in, and I had a student teacher who was amazing and took over and kind of ran things. I mean, my sub had made the awesome, it's Allie. Allie was my sub or my student teacher, and she's actually now working in the school district, so I'm very happy and proud of that.
COVID 2020 threw a lot of curveballs at those, really at everybody. Major curveball at the entire world, and even more so with people that had immune systems that were at risk. And because of your major surgery, you were one of those people that was, quote, immunocompromised. You were at risk because of that liver transplant. Why?
Because of the medicine that you have to take. I have to be on anti-rejection medicine, which kind of reverses what your immune system would normally do. Yeah, I was compromised, and there was even talk. I had met with the doctors and stuff, and we'd even gone through the process of at school of possible like medical retirement. That if I would be at too much danger being around those kids when we did finally come back, I wasn't quite ready to say I want to be done. There's a lot of rules that go along with that on what you can do with your life, and I wasn't quite ready for that either. So with the doctor's agreement, they said I could stay. So I got to stay, and
here you are still at it?
I'm still here at it. I made it through the worst part of COVID, even like when we came back to school and we were only every other day and we had masks and everything. But yeah, I got hit a little bit after that.
You would find out after you and your family, an extended family, took a trip to Disney. And upon returning from Disney, because that's when they started opening up and people just wanted to get outside, you and your son would contract COVID. And we're going to speed it up here a little bit in that your son got it and then you got it, and you were overlooking all of these signs. And some of those were reduced oxygen in your blood system or in your system. And you knew some of these numbers from the liver transplant things. So lead us into how then this would lead to 40 days in the hospital because you were immunocompromised and you got COVID. Talk about that.
Right, you kind of hit on it. Like, it is in the blood that they check for the oxygen levels that goes throughout your body. And my wife, bless her soul, like I mentioned before, is kind of my lifesaver. And
she works in the hospital.
She does. She works at St. Mary's, and she kind of realized that I didn't see, that I wasn't breathing right, wasn't taking care right. We ended up calling, our transplant coordinator, and they're like, nope, you should come into the hospital. I ended up getting admitted, and then it was just kind of a up and down roller coaster for 40 days. I swear the clock went backwards.
And this is where there was also a little bit of a shift in your DNA, mental makeup of there's nothing wrong with me. I'm going to get up and walk out of here. I'm going to go home and I'm going to be okay. And then there had to be some medical intervention.
Yep.
And I'm going to have you talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to set it up here. So some medical intervention, and you finally gave into that I'm going to get rid of that old feeling of the old school thinking. I'm tough, and I'm going to start listening to the medical advice of all of these people that are going to talk to me. And those were some hard statements that you were telling me before. Talk about a couple of those.
Yeah, hard statements, kind of getting it through my thick skull. Yeah, so for the first 3 weeks I was in the hospital, and it would go up and down. There was talk maybe I'd go home, then the next day it would be, well, now you're staying. About 3 weeks in, like I said, all of a sudden the medical team kind of rushed in. It looked like a scene out of a movie. Everybody's in hazmat suits, and the doctor's telling me that the numbers are really going the wrong direction, and he thinks I should go on a ventilator. And as I mentioned, all the things I heard about a ventilator, especially watching all the news about what they talk about with COVID and that was going on, I was like, no, thanks. I don't want that, because I didn't see the change when I watched the numbers. And then they called my wife, who said that, no, you're going to convince them to do it. And they were like, well, we can't make them. And she's like, no, but you're going to convince them.
Do whatever say whatever you need to say.
Yeah, don't hold back any punches. Don't hide anything. Don't sugarcoat it. And so the doctor came and said, we really think you should be on a ventilator. And I was still like, no. And he's like, all right, I'm going to be honest with you. If you don't go on a ventilator, we're not sure you'll make it through the night.
And he wasn't lying about this either, because
he didn't make it up just to get me to go on it. It was there. A lot of times when in medical stuff, they don't really kind of come right to the point.
Then they did.
But then they did, and I was kind of in shock. I was sitting there, and I couldn't quite believe it. And then I actually had a nurse volunteer to hold my hand. I hadn't seen my family at all in those 3 weeks. As I mentioned, ironically enough, her name was Angel.
The nurse came to...
Yeah, that was volunteering to hold my hand.
Maybe in your last hours of being here.
Maybe. I was like, I still don't know. And he's like, and to be frank with you, if I can't guarantee that you'll make it through the night, even if you go on the ventilator. And then that's when it kind of hit, like, all right, I got a lot of things out there. I got my family. as I mentioned, I remember looking down at the floor and going, this is a crappy place to die. Not against the hospital. They were awesome, but it's not the way I'd ever thought I would go out. And it's amazing because like when it gets put on you that fast, you don't have much time to think about it. It's not like my life flashed in front of me or anything, but I did start thinking about my family. I agreed. And then I guess the bright spot out of it was that was the only time I saw my wife. They let her come in while they were putting me on the ventilator, so I got to see her for a few minutes.
That's some powerful statements from some medical professionals. We talked a little bit before. That might be one of your advice. Some advice to people is listen to your medical team, doctors, physicians, nurses. And then you also mentioned a really cool thing that only teachers maybe understand, and maybe doctors, but because you and I are teachers, we understand this, that you had former students that were nurses that would, during COVID, they weren't letting a lot of people in, even family members in dire situations, but yours was dire. Your wife gets to come in, but then you also had some former students on the wing that were maybe coming by and knocking on the window and giving you some signs. Talk about that a little bit.
That's the part that kind of gets me emotional. As a teacher, they always talk to kids about how much a teacher can mean to a student in their life. To be quite honest, it works in reverse. As a teacher, there's been a lot of students that have affected my life, not just in this situation, but just in the classroom every year doing something that you make those connections with those, like in school, they always talk about the authentic relationships. And that was exactly the case. So there was a bunch of students that worked in the medical staff and worked on the floor. One I can remember, I just got to see her the other day. She stopped in and said hi, was Cassie. She would pop by the window, but she'd open the door and pop in and say hi quick. But that was such a nice thing. There were so many people that didn't have anybody to connect with, and just a little moral boost, someone give you the thumbs up, little wave. It was very special. I'll never forget those people.
I'm glad you talked for a little bit there because you said something about getting emotional, and I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to hold back tears right now because I've had those same relationships with students, and I think you really made a great point of they impact you in such a positive way, and they lift you up, and I've had that same situation. So I'm glad you talked a little bit so I could fight back my tears.
Yeah.
How is your physical health now?
I'm doing well. Progressing slowly. Still got to watch a ton of stuff. I still get to make regular visits to the doctors and have things checked and make sure everything's going well.
Hopefully there'll be a time in the future where, we think we're going to let you graduate from healthcare and go off into the sunset and not have to come back here anymore, but probably not.
Probably not completely, but it might be where, we're like right now. At one time, I was going every week to get blood checks, and then it would become every month, and now I'm at the point where I go every 3 months for blood work, and then instead of seeing the doctor 3 or 4 times a year, I only have to see him once. Shout out to Dr. Rice. I like him, but it's nice not to have to go all the time.
Well, there's a sign that you are thriving, you are surviving, you've survived, that you're here to tell your story today. But then there's also something that shows that you are thriving after all of this. You won a prestigious award at the end of the 2024 school year, and it's March 23rd right now, and I see on Channel 15 in Madison, the NBC affiliate in Madison, starting to talk about the Crystal Apple Award, which goes to, last year, it went to 5 Dane County, Madison area teachers, and you were one of 5 to win a Crystal Apple Award from WMTV Channel 15 in Madison, Wisconsin. Tell our listeners what that was like.
Well, that was just phenomenal because, that's where students are saying thank you. It's one thing to get an award from work and to do that, but boy, when it comes from the students, it blew me out of the water. I wasn't expecting it. And as you know, as a teacher, that's the coolest thing when you know that you made that connection with students and they appreciate you. A lot of times in teaching you hear a lot of negative stuff, but to get that pat on the back, I'm not going to lie, was I ready for the attention? It's one of the coolest things, and it'll go down as probably one of the best things I've ever received in teaching.
Well, congratulations again. Thanks. That was so cool.
Same to you.
This is where the subscribers, followers, and listeners take out the notebooks, pens, or pencils, and they're going to jot some things down. Here are Michael's suggestions that allowed him to survive and thrive after a liver transplant and contracting COVID and spending 40 days in the hospital. But this is also probably what has led to his successful teaching and coaching career and those great connections he had made. So here's what you shared, and we're going to go in order 5 things. And I'm going to toss these in softball style, being a former softball player and a coach. Here they come. I'm going to bring them in underhand. So number 1, you said family. Go ahead and hit that.
I grew up in a rather large family, even though my immediate family wasn't huge, but tons of first cousins that I grew up around, and boy, they were just great. Always in contact, always checking to see how you're doing. I was lucky there, and they're the most fun group you'll see. They so awesome at telling stories. I mean, I laugh every time we get together. I'd be remiss if I didn't say my own family, my wife, and even the family that came with her, and then of course my 2 children, and my wife is just unbelievable. I'm very lucky to have her still to this day looking out for me, which is probably some days not as fun, but not as fun because it's kind of, I'm getting there, but she's always looking out for me, and my kids are great, very supportive. Always worry a little bit about them for all that they went through, to have all that kind of happen. To be told that your dad isn't doing so well and stuff had to be rough, but they are troopers. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they're succeeding. They're being successful. So that's the best support you can ever have. I mean, that's who I spend most of my time with now.
Family. Number 2, faith. Hit that.
I grew up with, I'm Catholic. I go to church. I believe in God.
And somebody's maybe looking out for you that's doing something a little bit bigger than what we can see, feel, hear, touch, smell. And then what was so cool was when you mentioned the nurse's name was Angel. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a reason behind that. Number 3, trust. Hit that.
Kind of like you had mentioned before, trusting in those that are looking out for you, not only your family and your friends, but especially when it comes to the medical team. I mean, they were incredible. I mean, I would never be able to, I can't say anything but positive things. It was crazy because like when I was in ICU with COVID, most of the time I was the only one that was awake. Everybody else was on ventilators, and there was a couple nurses that when they had breaks, they come in and talk to me because I was the only one that could talk. So we got to have conversations. I get to see the ones that were from Oregon. I also got to meet. It's one of those ones where it's a small world. This one nurse had graduated with a niece and all kinds of different things. So they were incredible as well. Yep, trusting in what they say and believing that it'll come out right if you do what you're supposed to.
Number 4, teaching, and you sent me in your notes a couple of things: students, coworkers, and the community. And you had all of those from the career you chose, which was teaching and coaching. Go ahead and hit that.
Well, yeah, like I've been talking about, like those students were incredible, and the support, like even just recently with Crystal Apple, a lot of it's just hard to put in words. It's hard to say it sometimes, and just the thank you that I have from them, that they were a part of my life, and my coworkers have been awesome. Not only have they helped me become a better teacher, but just caring. I mean, a bunch of them would bring out meals for my wife and family and do all kinds of stuff. I had some that it's amazing because they were former students, and
now they're teaching.
Now they're teaching with me, and I do a lot of work with them, and they came out and they would fix something that was broken, or they'd mow the yard. They came out and looked after my wife and family when I was,
on the mend,
and not even there at sometimes. But boy, they're just an awesome group, and they're the ones too that they almost get to be like kids for you. I got one that I work with. He's going to be the new Oregon football coach. So, you know, he went to Whitewater. I remember going and watching him play, and he was an All-American there and won some national titles, but he's just an awesome guy too. And they all took that time to look after me, look after my family. So,
And the reason that you're here today is a good kind of a friend that came to the Dells after I graduated, Tim Martinelli.
Yeah.
Mr. Martinelli was a counselor in Oregon, and he reached out to me right away once he saw that I was doing the podcast and understood the theme of what does somebody go through, that they survive and thrive, and he said you.
Yeah, he's awesome. He was a guidance counselor when I first got started, and we started coaching together. And that group, when we started coaching football together, was, boy, some of the most fun I ever had. Not only was it some of those kids I was just mentioning, but the group was just, they were all supportive. They all came out. They all did the same thing. But we became like a little family. And, yeah, Tim was definitely a part of that. And Bob Prawl, the head coach. And yeah, so
all good guys. I've met some of those guys through coaching when I coached at Wanakee. So yeah, good staff of guys.
Oh, it was great. It was, you know, Dan Kissling and Rick Fleming and Chad Sodaki, all kinds of them. Yeah.
And then the last one, number 5, appreciation for the gifts of life. Hit that last one.
Losing my dad pretty early in my life, you could sit and reflect on the things that you don't have and the things you missed out on, but you kind of, I don't know if it's just the age that it happened, that I had to kind of learn that I had to look at the bright side. I had to be appreciative of what I did have with him, my mom, my family, everything that's happened. I think you asked me if there was a mantra or something or a motto that I like, and I'm a huge quote guy. I mean, I'm constantly throwing out quotes. I don't know if that's the coaching part of me or what.
I think you said you had this in your room somewhere, this quote.
Oh, I have that one there, but the coolest thing is my daughter now has it as a tattoo on her arm. Girls kind of get those on the back of their arm, but everything happens for a reason, and, you know, it goes all the way back to thinking about football. I mean, I went out for football for what reason? You know, to connect with my dad, and then that led to getting to go to college, which then led to coaching, which then led to teaching, and I remember once when my wife asked me if she thought, or if I thought my dad would have liked her, you know, because she never got to meet him. And I was like, oh, heck yeah, you know, he would have had a lot of fun, especially with his grandkids and everything. But I also had to look at it and go, do you realize that if my dad hadn't passed away, that I might have never met you, because who knows where life would have turned, that I came back to this area and then somehow got to meet her. And there was another fun one. That's a whole nother story. I met my wife because a student wanted me to go out with her.
Would you go out with my next door neighbor?
kind of along that line, yeah.
Well, I think because you are like me, there's just a lot of different layers, and we peel back the onion, and there's all kinds of... I guarantee we'll have you back. You'll always have a platform here, Michael.
Well, thank you.
What a great episode. I'm so glad you could join the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew today, your story, and how you got through liver transplant, how you got through COVID, and to be honored by your students with a Crystal Apple Award from one of our major affiliates in Madison is inspiring. And I think this story is going to help anybody who knows somebody or is going through the transplant process is going to say absolutely after listening to this podcast. I think they will say absolutely, because this guy tells it how it is and what happens, and look at it, how it's changed his life. Our call to action, Michael Derrick just shared his story and what it's like to have a liver transplant and survive COVID. He went through a scary time after receiving NASH, the diagnosis, Nonalcoholic Steatohepatitis diagnosis, and certainly some uncertainty, and because you were immunocompromised. However, you came through because of your 5 suggestions that helped you survive and thrive that. He hopes the story will inspire others with his outlook on life, which is a very good one. Here are Michael's 5 suggestions to thrive. Number 1, family. Number 2, faith. Number 3, trust. Number 4, really his career has really helped him get through that time. and still continues to help. And that's his students, coworkers, and community. And number 5 is appreciation for the gifts of life. Final thoughts as we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. Are there any final thoughts, Michael?
Obviously, love to thank you for letting me come on here. It's an honor.
This is so cool.
Appreciate it. Tell my story. It's something that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more doing my students laugh at how I like to tell stories. And of course, all the people that could think, and I'm sure if I try going through, I would miss a bunch, but obviously my family, my wife, I can't say enough there. My lovely children who kind of are my life now, and all those other people, all my friends, and, co-workers who a lot of them have become like family, and all that they've done, not only with just my career, but just with my life. And like I said, try to remember, keep a positive outlook. I've always, I don't think at least I hope I didn't. I don't think I ever asked why me or why this happened. Just trying to take it as it goes and remember everything happens for a reason. And probably my biggest one, and my kids, the students will probably tell you the biggest thing is I definitely have the dad sense of humor. So keep a sense of humor.
A lot of dad jokes.
A lot of dad jokes. I make a lot of bad references.
Amazing.
But, yeah.
And I also want to put a plug in there, too, for transplant donors.
Yep.
Organ
Donate
donors.
life.
Donate life. I love it. On our next episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they learn to survive and thrive. If you have a story to share or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.